Hello, everyone. Welcome to The Future of Law is Today, the podcast bringing you straight talk on law, legal tech, and where the profession is going. I'm your host, Ceschino, and we're cutting through the hype to talk about what's changing in this field, and what still needs to. Today's guest is Peter Ambrose, the founder of two interlinked ventures. One is The Partnership, a London-based law firm specializing in property conveyancing, that's the legal process of buying or selling real estate. The other is Legalito, a software company born out of the firm and aimed at making conveyancing easier, more transparent, and less error-prone for lawyers. With a technology background and more than 20 years in the software industry, Peter brings a rare combination to the legal world: tech fluency and deep operational experience in law. Whether you're interested in how to run a tech-forward law firm, how to automate legal workflows without losing the human element, or simply why buying a house still feels like a slog, Peter's perspective offers sharp insight. So Peter, very happy to have you with us. And to get started, can you tell us a little bit about your professional background and what you're working on today?
Sure. First of all, great to be here today. And in terms of where I've come from, I run a law firm today, but that wasn't my background. I spent years in technology, about 20 years in the States, in the Netherlands, and decided that time for a change. So I decided to set up a law firm because it sounded like it was a really good idea at the time. And here we are 15 years later, got nearly 100 people at the law firm, and we developed all our own software, and we were like, this is amazing. And then we looked around and we were like, we got to help those other guys out there that haven't really got the same sort of technology that we've got. So set up a software company called Legalito, designed to develop software for other lawyers. So that's what I'm working on at the moment, running the law firm, but also running Legalito, which is a tech startup, really, a couple of years in, but doing really well.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Yeah, you don't usually hear about people starting a law firm just because it sounds like a good idea at the time. But
Yeah, as I say, it sounded like a good idea at the time. 15 years later, I'm like, oh, okay, that's a challenge. But no, it's good. It's really good, and it gives you a good insight as to what goes on in the industry.
yeah, absolutely. I like to say the same thing about my own decision to attend law school. It seemed like a good idea at the time.
Seems like that.
So when you're looking at what Legalito's clients are doing with AI today, what are the main areas where they're using AI?
The main areas today is quite limited. They're using it to rewrite documents. They're using it to make emails slightly less tricky, less aggressive. There's a lot around word manipulation, doing responses to complaints, but summarizing documents and looking at documents itself, but not actually doing analysis, cross-document analysis or anything like that, or anything particularly smart. It's to do with how can I break this down into bullet points and so forth. But overall, it's quite limited. We see people using Copilot, for example, but a lot of that is just to rewrite the way that they communicate with their clients.
Yeah. So it sounds like they're not necessarily even using dedicated legal AI tools. It's really just
No,
analytic.
absolutely not. Yeah, we are in the SME space, don't forget. Certainly we're seeing it for contract drafting, document drafting in the big law space, but we're not seeing it in the SME space, not yet. It may come to it, but those aren't the big issues that face us. We're not doing a lot of contract back and forth. We're not doing huge amounts of drafting, a little bit in the commercial property space, but that's not what in the SME space that people are doing.
Got it. That makes sense. And yeah, there's that survey people were talking about recently where I think it's at least in the US, more than 90% of lawyers said they're using AI. But then when you dig into the numbers, it turns out, well, most of them just opened up ChatGPT, tried that.
Yeah, there's such a shortage of a legal specific AI that people are really struggling to find something that they trust. There are other questions around hallucination and liabilities. I was just talking to a law firm earlier today, and they said, well, if it goes wrong, who's liable? I'm like, you know who's liable, it's you.
Yeah.
And this is a bit that people are struggling with. They want to blame the AI, but it's much the same way. You can't blame an individual lawyer. It's the company that's responsible.
But building on that, does the current thin wrapper approach work for lawyers?
That's a really good question. I think there's an awful lot of vendors out there that are producing, and I like the term thin wrapper. I always said that. I kept talking about this veneer getting thinner and thinner as people were relying on the underlying development of the AI providers. There's a lot of people that are using industry standard AI within their world, but it's not adding a lot of value. So I think that's why you're not getting the take up that you should. So you will see a lot of vendors going, oh, we now have AI and it can help you with drafting or help you with this. But it is just this thin veneer around whether it's OpenAI or Gemini or anything like that. And you do see lawyers saying, oh, I've become really expert at prompting. And I even say people going, oh, lawyers would be really good for prompting. Lawyers shouldn't be doing prompting because of the inconsistencies and the issues that you get from that way. And they've got to work within a much more tightly controlled environment. So I think the idea that, oh, yes, give a lawyer a general AI, a thin wrapper around a general AI, and they'll be amazingly successful, I'm really not comfortable about that at all.
And could you dig a little bit more into that? We've heard this phrase prompt engineering, and I don't hear as many people using that phrase these days, but what does it mean, and should lawyers be learning to be AI prompt engineers?
Do you remember if you go back a few years ago, everyone was saying lawyers should become engineers? There was this talk about they were the only people because they've got the right. And in some ways, lawyers are ideally suited to be software engineers because they think very broadly and they can't assume very linear approaches. I think there was this talk that prompt engineering was going to be the new job that all the smart guys had, and lawyers should jump on that bandwagon and so forth. I think because what's been happening is they've been trying it, they've been getting mixed results, and they've said, well, actually, do I want to invest my time and energy into this? And certainly what we're seeing in Legalito is when we're providing prepackaged solutions using AI, people are going, that's amazing. I can't believe you've done this for me. I can now work with these documents and understand all this stuff. And you've done this. It's like, well, yeah, we trained it, but then we know how to do prompt engineering. And we don't expect you to learn how to do that. I think it's a fundamental mistake to say to a lawyer, you're really good at lawyering, but what you really need to be better at is prompt engineering. My view with lawyers is what they really need to be better at is communication and working with their clients. That's what they need to spend their time working on, those skills.
Yeah, to your point, not that long ago, a bunch of people kept saying, "Oh, everybody needs to learn how to code. You need to learn how to code your own solutions." And to be fair, the first thing I did when I stopped practicing law was learn some coding, some basics of Python and JavaScript.
Yeah.
But at the same time, there's a difference between being a full stack engineer or being a dedicated engineer of any sort and practicing law or having any other sort of professional specialty.
I think that's it. And there is this idea, the whole fashion at the moment for vibe coding, and anyone can produce anything now. And it's like it doesn't work that way, unfortunately. I wish it did. I wish that you could say it's a bit like people come to us, right? They go, well, anyone could be a lawyer. All right. And we would say, well, the rise of the Google lawyer. So our clients would say, well, we know this stuff because we've Googled it. And I would say the Google lawyer is a poodle compared with the Rottweiler. There's the ChatGPT's lawyer, right? Because now they go, now I can show all the reasoning behind it and why you shouldn't do this and why you shouldn't do that. We're like, oh, my days. So that's, I think people apply the same thing. Oh, I can do vibe coding, therefore I'm an engineer. It's like, but you're not an engineer because you can't foresee all the problems in much the same way that not everyone can be a lawyer because they can't think broadly enough. This whole idea that suddenly you can be an expert, prompt engineer or an expert coder or anything like that. Sure, you can code. Absolutely, I can code. Yeah, but would I be trusted to develop my own systems? Absolutely not.
Yeah, it's a great point. There's coding and there's engineering. So if anybody, especially these days, anybody can vibe code a prototype, and that's great.
Yeah.
But there's a difference between that and actually architecting an enterprise-grade software solution, or even one that's fit for a small law firm.
And it's funny, I think you must have been bugging our offices because this is exactly the conversation we had an hour ago. Because one of a major provider has been down for a couple of hours, and we were like, building enterprise-grade software is really difficult.
Yeah.
And you can't, because I'd been shown this demonstration of an amazing software platform, and it really was amazing, case management system. I was like, this is fantastic. But I was saying to my colleague, I went, it's great, but I think support could be a concern. And also, is it going to keep going? Is it going to keep working? Because the guy actually had a couple of bugs in it when he was doing it. It would fail to do a number of things. And he's like, oh, I don't understand why this has failed. I'm like, well, and with lawyers, it can't fail. It cannot fail. And that's a challenge for anyone that wants to do anything that's involved in technology. You've got to produce something that runs 24/7, is easily usable, minimal training requirements. And that comes with expertise and design expertise and so forth.
Yeah, really good point. It seems like a small thing, but then when you're dealing with anything that has less than 99.9% uptime, it's suddenly not such a small deal.
It is, and that's the difficulty, and that's where architecture comes into play. And that's where designing systems that, because they always say, isn't it, something like 80% of code is never used. Yeah, because that's all the stuff that's trapping all the mistakes and so forth. But you say to someone who doesn't have experience, they go, but look, I built this application, it's amazing. And you go, well, what about these edge cases? What about what happens when three people try to do the same thing all at once? And that's where it gets quite difficult. And I think that's why people dabbling in this stuff, we've been building software for 10 years at the partnership. And so when we set up Legalito, it's like we've done 10 years experience of this stuff.
Yeah. And may I ask, did you have a prior coding or software engineering background before you?
I did. Yeah. When I did my first job when I was working for a major US manufacturer, it was in the software business. And I started off by doing that. And in fact, for reasons I won't bore you with, when I started the partnership, I ended up writing the whole system for the partnership, which was a very scary proposition. It ran on my system up until about 3 years ago, which is a very scary proposition. And it worked fine, but it wasn't scalable. And there were issues around security and all this kind of stuff. So that's why we rewrote it.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. That even with that software background, you still run into the challenges of actually scaling software, making it adequately secure.
Yeah, because it's complicated, this stuff. And obviously we're dealing with client details, and security is really, really important.
Yeah. On one hand, it's appealing to think that everybody could just quickly, in a couple hours, code all these custom solutions. And, and maybe if it's something that they're just using on their own computer, yeah, a lot of people can do that. But again, there's just a difference between doing that and creating something that applies to a bunch of different people's use cases and is constantly working and is not leaking people's data out onto the open internet.
Yeah, absolutely. This is it. People say to us, "Oh, what about security? Are you leaking this information?" It's like, no, we've got a closed API and all this kind of stuff. But yeah, it's a major concern. But security is security is our number one thing. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So if you are looking to get started with an AI in a way that is secure and sustainable, how can lawyers get started using AI, given the current reliance of so many lawyers on paper?
Yeah, it's difficult. I always say that a great starting point is a scanner, which sounds really trite, okay, but it's true. Someone said to me at a conference a few years ago, "How can we make lawyers more effective?" I said, "Buy a scanner." And they went, "Oh, that's really trivial." It's like, no. If your documents aren't electronic, you're stuffed. And I find this even the most basics. It's like, no, seriously, scan stuff, and they look at you like you're crazy, right? If you don't have the documents in electronic format, you cannot do anything with them. The great advantage that we've seen with AI now is that you can now read any document. And in the past, if you were OCRing stuff, it was a nightmare, because if it was scanned in not the right way, you couldn't OCR it. So people would say, well, I've scanned these documents, but I can't do anything with it. And so what we found with AI, which has been amazing because the way that it works, is we can now read any document. So I think that frees up a lot of people now from what they had before. Well, I've scanned it, but it's just like an image. And you go, well, okay, and it was useless. So I think that affected the credibility of saying, well, that's all very well, have the documents electronically, but then what? Well, I'm still going to have to scroll backwards and forwards because I can't do anything with it. But now with AI, because if you've got scanned documents, you can process it, you can read it. My advice to anyone is play with it. Yeah. Play with it. It's like, try it out, see, especially when you're looking at comparing documents. That's really interesting. Really interesting.
Yeah, it's a really good point. And these things can seem small, but just having an actual digital copy and being able to compare two documents without going through every line, every word manually, one at a time, it is really a game changer.
But it's also the ability not only about comparing documents, but looking at documents and saying, okay, that document relates to that issue and that relates to that issue, and bringing them together. That's the stuff that's amazing. Where you sit there going, well, I've got this information to do with this mortgage lender, and I've got that information to do with that management company, and being able to compare the two together is amazing. Really amazing, because they're totally not connected. They're totally disconnected. And that's where we've been blown away.
Yeah, and you touched on that earlier. Yes, you can use AI to summarize one document at a time, get bullet lists of what it says. But once you actually get into the implications of the document and the implications of these two separate documents, these two separate clauses in separate documents, right?
Yeah.
That's where it really starts to get interesting.
It gets mind-blowing, if I'm frank with you, because you look at it, you go, how did it work out that correlated to that and that correlated to that? And that's where it gets interesting. And that's the work we've been doing. And the way, interestingly, and a good lesson to your viewers, what we did is back in February, we said to our lawyers that here's a closed LLM, play with it, come up with some ideas. And they did some really funky stuff. And we were like, why are you doing that? Why are you comparing that with that? And they're like, well, because we'd always compare that with that. And you're like, wow. And that's what drove a lot of the development of Legalito, because we went, did you know you can compare this document with that online resource and get this information? And lawyers are like, oh my God, you can do that? And it was like, yeah. And that was because we gave it to our lawyers and we said, play with it. One guy, he fed in loads of bank statements for a client. I'm like, what are you doing? Well, I want to check what they add up and how they cross-correlate. Okay, and sure enough, it did in a minute what it would take an hour to do normally. Well, what made you think about uploading all these bank statements to this AI? And he goes, well, I don't know. I just thought I'd give it a go.
No, that's fantastic. But
it was really interesting.
Yeah, but that really illustrates the importance of having people who are in the trenches doing legal work. To experiment with it and test it and see what makes sense. How can this actually be useful? Because you have so many solutions that are looking for a problem.
Looking for a problem, and I do see that all the time. We're doing this and this. Why? Who told you that was a problem? Whereas with something going, we said to the lawyers, do whatever you like. It's amazing. We were just like, we were blown away. Okay, they're quite. We employ inquiring minds, but amazing. Yeah. Amazing what they were doing, and we were like, wow, we could use that. And then we showed it to other lawyers. They were like, gee, you guys really know what you're talking about. And like, well, yeah, because we're lawyers. Yeah. Sounds obvious. Yeah. It sounds really obvious, but it's not.
Yeah, and that's a great point, that the product direction in terms of what people choose to develop in terms of software features, it really is influenced by your starting point and your mindset. So if you're not a lawyer and your goal is, I don't like paying lawyers to do stuff, as far as I can tell, all lawyers do is draft documents. So I'm going to make AI draft documents. You see that from some of these AI companies where they don't have any lawyers and stuff, not just legal tech, just in general, right?
Yeah,
great. Now I can just have AI draft a contract for me. I don't need to pay a lawyer.
Yeah, that's right. But it's because they haven't really analyzed the problem, and that's the thing.
Precisely. And if you are a lawyer, you're looking at, well, the real bottleneck to me in analyzing this problem is sorting through this pile of 100 documents or 1,000 documents or 1 million.
That's right.
And
that's
see
exactly
the connections between them.
Yeah, that's exactly it. Exactly it. Yeah.
So flipping the script, we've talked about how lawyers can benefit from using AI in their practices, but there are also risks. And one thing that you and I talked about recently that is not getting a lot of attention is there any evidence of lawyers' clients using AI against them?
Lots. Lots. We've seen over the last 3 to 6 months a massive increase of clients using AI, and they're using it in all sorts of things. So, for example, what we thought they would do, or what I thought they would do, was after we'd reported to our clients, they would take all the evidence we provide, take our report, compare the two, and say, aha, this is what you've missed, and we're going to sue you. Which did happen, okay? It is happening, okay? But now what they're doing, they're then taking it to the next level where they're saying, actually, and what we're going to do is we're going to issue proceedings using AI. So that's what they're doing then. Then what they started doing, this was a new one just a few weeks ago, where what they did is we gave them all the documents just at the beginning and say, look, this is what we're going to be working on because we're a caring, sharing firm. Yeah, this is what we're going to be doing, right? And they went the next day, these are the questions you need to ask. We're like, wow, we weren't expecting that. And I think where lawyers are making a huge mistake is not recognizing the danger. And it's a clear and present danger, which is, and in fact, interesting, we're going to see one of the largest underwriters in the country tomorrow, up at Lloyd's, okay? Because we said to them, brace yourself, guys. There's a wall of claims, the like of which you've never seen before. And we know this is happening. How do we know this is happening? Because it's happening to us. And when I go out and I talk to lawyers, I say, so are your clients using AI? Without exception, they say yes. Without exception. And so we're saying, well, look, if people are using AI, you need to get ahead of it. So there's a very, very strong and very compelling argument that says, if you're a lawyer that's not using AI, forget about the competing lawyer, okay? Think about your clients. Because this old truism that says, oh, the lawyers that don't use AI are going to be replaced by those that do use AI. That's very simplistic, all right? What you need to do is the lawyers that don't use AI are going to be sued by their clients who are using AI.
Yeah, it's a different sort of warning.
It's a different kind of warning.
Everybody's talking about, you'll be replaced by somebody who's using AI, but it's the new Google lawyer, right?
Yeah.
You're the same thing in medicine, Google doctors, and now
Google doctors. That's right.
Going to ChatGPT or Claude for legal and medical advice.
Think of the Google lawyer as a little fluffy poodle, Yeah. And the chat GPT, he's that angry Rottweiler.
Yeah, it's a great analogy. Easy enough to fight off a poodle, hopefully. But,
Exactly. Yeah, the
Rottweiler
poodles
makes them look
poodles are a piece of cake.
Okay, so building on that point,
Yeah.
what data do lawyers need to have available to grant them the protection they need against that Rottweiler?
As much as they can possibly get, which is a really fluffy way of saying it. But the reality is you need to harvest every element of every case that you can and present it in a way that lawyers can use it. So, for example, we deal with the public, okay, which is a special kind of challenge. And the public will always accuse you of either being incompetent or have done nothing. That's their go-to-market strategy. Yeah. So what you have to do is you have to say, right, capture all the information that you were given or that you can create, so that when a client says, well, you've done nothing for 3 weeks, you can say, but we can because of this, this, and this. And so not only have you got to have the performance data, in other words, this is what I've done and when I did it, but you've also got to have all the documents in a way that you can find it quickly. So, for example, if someone sends you a document and the client sends it to you the day before, you received it from the other side, and the client calls up and says, well, you've had it a day, what have you been doing with it? The ability to be able to extract information from that document quickly, maybe to give a high-level summary, you've got to be able to do this quickly, because otherwise clients go, well, what have you been doing? You've been doing nothing. I was told the other day that you told me you've got those documents. What have you been doing? And you say, well, I've got another 30 clients I've got to be thinking about. You go, well, no, because I'm your only client and I'm the most important. And you've got to be able to distill information out of documents accurately and quickly. So my argument is, what sort of data? Every piece you can get your hands on.
Yeah, it's a good point. We touched on this a bit, but it really transforms what document review looks like. When you're doing it, one of the first things I did back when I was a summer associate, this is a while ago, I won't date myself, but we went on site and we went to this room full of piles and piles of binders. And the first year associate, and looked through as many of them as we could in the time we had, and hope, and you just hope you have a representative sample. But to your earlier point about digitizing documents, you digitize them, you use AI to look through what's in them, and you suddenly have a much more comprehensive search of what all those documents actually contain.
Because the problem being is that if you don't do it, someone else is going to do it.
Yeah.
So it's a bit like what we do. We do property, all right? And the number of times people say, God, I can't believe, if you're selling a property, you guys, I can't believe this property was ever bought. The title is so poor. There's so many problems with it. Wow, guess no one spotted that problem before. Let's cross our fingers and hope we get away with it. Yeah. Going forward, you're not going to be able to hide behind the fact, well, good news, I've got an overworked human that might be looking at these documents. Because if you've got an all-seeing, all-powerful AI that can look at every single problem, that excuse of, gosh, hope we get away with it, or I hope they miss it in case in the future, you can't use that anymore, which is my argument for why there's going to be more claims.
Yeah. Interesting point. If you do miss something, there's the question, well, we have all these tools that summarize all these documents for you and help you find the connections. So why did he miss it?
Yeah.
Did he not use the tool?
Yeah. Did he not? Why was he not using the best tools available? Not the age-old argument which is coming through at the moment. It's like, well, how can lawyers afford to charge what they're doing if they're just using technology? Which is obviously, the death of the billable hour. How are we going to make sure that, that we're charging properly if we're using the technology? And the client's saying, well, you're using technology, your fees should come down. And you get into these philosophical arguments. What are you using technology for? Well, it's to help me advise you better.
Yeah. That's a really great point. What does zealous representation look like? As a duty of care as a lawyer, does it become a matter of legal ethics that if you decide not to use reliable AI tools to help you find every fact and turn every rock and all that?
Exactly. Have you been effectively advising your client? Because if there are tools available that you didn't use to spot that problem with that lease or that problem with that agreement or that contract, well, hang on, are you not a little bit negligent if you knew, for example, that those tools were available and it would reduce the risks involved? This is what we're talking to the insurers about tomorrow. At some point, at what point do lawyers become liable for not using this technology?
Yeah. And we're already seeing, just in terms of costs, there are already clients putting pressure on their outsourced legal advisors at looking at, okay, well, we're using AI internally. We know you're using AI. You're not passing along any of the cost savings. But then the next part is, to your point, did you catch everything that you could have? Could we have done this better in-house just by plugging it into our own AI systems?
Yeah, that's right. That's right. It's an interesting issue.
It is fascinating. All right. So we've talked about the data that lawyers need to have to serve the clients effectively, to protect themselves against these AI Rottweilers. How can lawyers build their own data solutions if their CMS or their IT department won't oblige?
That is probably the biggest question of our time. If you're in an environment that doesn't have the technology available to you, what can you do? I think, there's a reason why most people use Excel, right? Why do so many lawyers use Excel? Well, because it's a tool that's freely available to them and they use it. What's the biggest downside? Lawyers using Excel, right? I was talking to someone the other day, and they said about tracking the questions that came in. I'm like, well, how do you do this? There must be hundreds of these questions. Oh, we use Excel. And never has the adage, when the only thing you've got is a hammer, everything looks awfully like a nail, be more appropriate. And I think this is the issue, is that if there isn't an investment at the company level with the CMS systems, you've got to find your own way, because that's the other problem. People go, well, we can't do anything because our CMS isn't good enough or it's not fit for purpose. And you go, you can't just sit there and go, well, let's just hold our hands up and go, well, there's something we can do. I think lawyers have to start taking their own responsibility. And if that means scanning their own documents or having working with a paralegal or doing something with more documents and finding tools that are available that they can use, I think they have to start doing that, because I think in the days of saying, well, the systems doesn't do it or my company doesn't provide it, well, you got a duty of care to your client. And just sitting back and going, well, no, they haven't agreed this. That said, I think law firm owners need to step up. I think one of the biggest challenges that we've seen is law firm owners looking to the future, always going, well, I'm just worried about my own retirement or my own this, my own that, and so forth. You've got to provide the best software tools for your lawyers. It's a knowledge business. And if you're not as a law firm owner looking out for how you can help your lawyers, how you can invest in systems for them, I think you've got to look yourself in the mirror and say, am I doing best by my people? And we see a lot of this. We see an awful lot of this with lawyers getting incredibly frustrated because their business owners don't want to invest.
Yeah, it's a great point. And it goes back to not just the individual lawyer's standard of care for the clients, but as a leader, are you putting your entire organization in the best position to succeed? Are you giving your young talent? They want to use technology. People my age grew up with the internet. We grew up on computers. We want to use the best tech available. And I know certainly I get frustrated if I don't have access to at least a decent suite of software tools when I know they're out there, as long as I know they work well and they're secure. So are you really investing in your firm's future and your firm's ability to provide the best service?
Absolutely.
Keeping your employees happy.
Absolutely. And I don't think they are. And that's, there are questions to be asked. There really are.
Yeah. All right. This has been a great conversation. Wrapping it up, what are the key takeaways you want the audience to come away with today?
Doing nothing is not an option. You can't deny the use of AI because of any concerns that you might have around hallucinations and liabilities. The reality is that we are now getting to the point where consumers will start. They used to always say consumers will start voting with their feet and move to firms that give good service or good technology. I've never really believed that 100%. What I do believe, however, is that consumers will start turning to their machines to undermine your work, undermine your credibility, and to try and squeeze out as much money in compensation and claims and so forth as they possibly can. And I think if you're certainly a private client, but even working in a commercial practice where you'll have it with the other side, your customers will start to be more demanding. And I won't say are starting to become more demanding, and you need to respond to it. And it needs to be sooner rather than later, because this change is coming faster than anyone thinks.
I appreciate those insights. All right. So before we go, I like to do a little something at the end where we keep it human, because the whole point of inventing and using all this AI stuff is hopefully so we can preserve the human side of our existence, our creativity, our ability to think critically. and ideally have a little fun, spend some time with our
Okay.
families or our loved ones. So yeah, keeping it human. Peter, what would you like to share with us today?
I think I'm probably one of the only people running a law firm today that can profess to have juggled professionally in Covent Garden in London. I'm very
Wait,
proud of that.
you juggled professionally?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I pitched up, juggled for money. Is that profession? I'm very pleased
Interesting.
with that. When I was younger,
Yeah,
yeah, I
well,
used to go
if you
to
got
I
paid
used
to
to go
do
to
it.
juggling school in Covent Garden.
Yeah, I don't know whether I've ever met another lawyer who has been a professional juggler.
Yeah, it was really good. It was really good, but it's behind me now, and I'm atrocious now. So you lose your motor skills as you get older.
Yeah, still, it's a transferable skill, right? With all the things you have to juggle as a
It,
lawyer.
it is a transferable skill. Yeah, coordination is a good thing.
Yeah, terrible joke. Yeah,
Terrible
dad
joke.
jokes are kind of my thing. All right, well, Peter, this has been fantastic. Thank you very much for coming on the podcast. I learned a lot. I'm sure our audience did as well. If people want to get in touch with you and learn more, how can they reach out?
Best thing is go to legalito.co.uk.
Fantastic. Legalito.co.uk.
Yep.
All right. Thanks, Peter, and thanks everyone for listening. Catch you next time. That's it for this episode of The Future of Law is Today. Subscribe for more straight talk on law and legal tech, and share it with someone who still thinks Master of Laws when you say LLM. Thanks for listening.